everyone. Today we're going to start with 3.7, the Second Great Awakening. Your objective for today is students are going to be able to explain how a Christian revival spread throughout the United States and inspired people to address issues within society. So people were addressing problems that were happening socially in our country because they were so inspired by this Christian revival. Okay, so the Second Great Awakening took place between 1820 and 1830, and its effects lasted much longer than that. So the Second Great Awakening was inspired by a Christian revival So here we see somebody preaching. We see a large amount of people, both men and women and families. You see some children set up. You even see what looks like tents set up, so people are kind of there for the day, listening to the preacher. And essentially what it was is, or what they would say, is something along the lines of people's relationship with God is impacted by your own personal responsibility. So the way that you achieve salvation, according to the Great Awakening, or the way that you are saved, is by turning away sin. So what they meant by this was that they would then find what they considered sinful acts within society, and then they would work as a group to address that and try to correct it as a way to become closer with God, or as a way to build your responsibility with God. And so in a way, even though this was a religious movement, it really inspired a lot of social change. That we're going to talk about here over the next couple of lessons. So the middle class movement was inspired by the Great Awakening, right? This idea that we have to reform society, to remove sin from society. So we're removing sin from society. And we saw this a lot with middle class people, with middle class families were inspired by this. So the first movement that we see here in the pictures, and this is what we call the temperance movement. And the idea behind the temperance movement was that a group of women believed that drinking was a sin. And you see here a lot of advertisements like this would be put out. So they're tempted, then persuaded to have a drink, and then they continue to have a drink, and then before you know it, they're wrecked here on the end. A second movement that formed during this time period was what we call the common school movement. Much more positive movement. And this said that everyone should have a free education, paid for by the government. And then the third and final movement dealt with mental institutions. You had a woman by the name of Dorothea Dix. And Dorothea worked to reform mental institutions after she realized that people were being held in cages. And so after she realized that, she really worked hard to reform and provide more humane treatment for people in mental institutions. In addition to inspiring changes within our society, it also inspired changes within the workforce to fight for better working conditions. So we started to see labor unions form, and the cause of this was to fight for better working conditions, for example, one reason or one inspiration was you would see children as young as 10 working in factories. And we'll get to this a little bit more as we go through this course. Now, the first labor union for female workers was the Lowell factory, which we see here. We see the Lowell offering. And this was started off by a group of what we call Lowell girls. And these were girls that worked in the textile industry. And what they would do is they would publish this document, and with poetry, so it would include poetry and songs about their lives and what it was like to work in this factory. And the result was that they got a shortened workday. So they got to work a shortened workday. So it went down from 14 hours down to 10 hours. So again, the whole inspiration behind the Second Great Awakening was, even though it was a religious movement to begin with, the idea being looking for sin and trying to address sin, what it really did was look at social issues and address social issues within the communities. So doing things like providing better working conditions for women and children, doing things like ensuring a free education, or even things like improving the mental institutions for the mentally sick. So these are all positive things that came out of the Second Great Awakening and really helped change and reform our society.